Hello, fantastic people. I hope you're having a great day. I just picked up this blanket jacket the other day at Goodwill. We're supposed to be having some weather, so if there's anything that you need for around the house, I recommend you go to your local Goodwill store. See if they have it. Pick some up. They're saying that this might be similar to a storm that we had several years back where people were left without power for oh my gosh, I think it was for a week. It wasn't, I think, oh my gosh, I can't remember. Isn't that terrible? So anyway, go to the grocery store and get whatever you might need for a week in case, the storm knocks out the grid for quite some time. I don't think it's going to be that bad. It's beautiful out here today. God, thank you for this beautiful new day. We were under like a deep freeze. I think it was 5 degrees yesterday morning. It's a little too cold for me. Hence this ridiculous jacket. Look at this thing. I put the hood up. You guys can't even see me. I'm like a gay little Eskimo. There we go. A little while back, I think, I don't know if it was NASA. It might have been my NASA video. Yeah, it still has the tags on it. $10.99 blanket jacket. Sorry. Okay, stop being distracted. Believe it was my NASA video. We got into the Nazis. Or was it my Bush video? Or was it both? Anyway, Operation Paperclip and all the Nazi scientists that they brought over. And how MK Ultra came about in America and how Charles Manson and then they have, all the occult stuff that they were doing and incorporated that, with the Nazi stuff. So anyway, we got on the subject of super spies. And this kind of is a follow-up video, I guess, and it also incorporates a subject that I have never talked about, although I've stumbled upon it in my research, and that is shape-shifting, also known as skinwalkers. So take a listen and let me know what you think. You have a good one. Bye-bye. In society, you'll see a lot of this Marxist Catholic theology playing out with these protesters and rioters and these no kings people and Antifa and stuff like that. So we saw it a lot in the 60s with SDS, Weather Underground, and things like that. Don't put any extra thought into what I just said. Don't let your mind wander and go off about, oh, but Trump this. Listen, I probably know more about Trump's crimes than the average person. I know about the International Criminal Court ruling and everything and what's going on and what he's done. I know. So get that out of your head and just focus exactly on what I'm saying. Please. Thank you so much. This is Marxist Catholic theology. So in the 30s, you had a man named Jack Parsons. He becomes very, very important. He actually becomes the father of modern rocketry. He would conduct backyard experiments at the age of 12. In 34, he and Edward Foreman met PhD candidate Frank Molina at Caltech, and the three managed to impress Molina's supervising professor, Dr. Theodore van Karman, enough that he allowed the young engineers to conduct experiments at the university's Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory. Thus, the blueprint for NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab was born. Parsons and Molina even wrote a sci-fi screenplay and pitched it around to several Hollywood production companies. Most of their experiments increasingly ended in violent explosions that terrified neighboring Caltech academics. So much, the three researchers were nicknamed the Suicide Squad. So by 1939, Parsons was enraptured with Aleister Crowley's revival of what began as a 16th century philosophy. Thelma was by this time a sprawling esoteric movement incorporating ancient Egyptian deities, sex rituals, and a range of Eastern and Western mysticism. And we are seeing this today. The left, especially those on the Democratic side of politics, have done a fabulous job incorporating ultra-feminism and witchcraft, mysticism, hoodoo, voodoo, all of this occult into politics. It's been normalized, and we're seeing it play out on a daily basis now. Strange Angel, Parsons' own religious and scientific pursuits have proven screenworthy. Now, rocket science is sort of synonymous with the most esoteric of sciences. We have that expression. It's not rocket science. So Jack Parsons became a vital link in two mighty chains in human history, rocketry and ritual magic. His science was built on intuition and his magic on experiment. I don't think so. It was the occult. Now, remember that Strange Angel sci-fi movie? Tells the bizarre tale of a character whose innovations in rocket fuel design were vital to mankind's leaving the surface of the planet. Simultaneous with his more material scientific pursuits, he also tried, with painstaking ritual, but apparently failed, to create a moon child, a magic being conjured via mystic ritual, who would usher in a new age of unfettered liberty and signal the end of the Christian era and its outmoded morality. And that was Pendle's book, Strange Angel, The Otherworldly Life of Rocket Scientist John Whiteside Parsons. Parsons had no successful formal education beyond high school, but he was obsessed with explosives, and then later he became obsessed with the occult. So we have a really good understanding now, the formation of NASA, I believe. 30s real quick, Meyer Lansky, Jewish mafia, he's the mob boss. He ensnares Hoover and a homosexual tryst. He's got the FBI wrapped around his finger. By the time the State of Israel is created, he's able to smuggle weapons into Israel with the help of other criminals. The United States was allowing them to ship from Panama to Israel. Okay, so fast forward to the 40s, we're fighting the Nazis. U.S. is strapped. They're paranoid, and they have this terrible idea to get organized crime involved to help protect the ports of New York. They do catch many spies, but as it turns out in the end, what they call Project Underworld, these organized crime bosses had little to no role in.
Now you have to remember, this all goes back to the Civil War. That's when we lost America and we became the U.S. government system after that. Sorry to interrupt.
The capture of these spies. What came out of that was an SS scientist who was captured and shared the experiments that they were conducting. Anyway, these Nazis were employed over here in the United States. And I can't even imagine the contributions that they've made, especially in regards to this nanotechnology, AI, space, which I'm really starting to think a lot of what NASA has put out over the years is total garbage. If you look into the history of NASA, and we'll touch on that very briefly, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And if you look at American history in like the last 50 years, you'll also start to see what I'm talking about in regards to the CIA and mind control, especially trauma induced mind control. If you look into the history of NASA, and we'll touch on that very briefly, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And if you look at American history in like the last 50 years, you'll also start to see what I'm talking about in regards to the CIA and mind control, especially trauma-induced mind control. And after the Charlie Kirk assassination, which I believe was trauma-based mind control, I think a whole lot of other things. You can look into those videos if you want. I started thinking about the Challenger explosion and how public schools, obviously a government institution that is very, very good at dumbing down the populace. But I thought about how we were forced. My generation was forced to watch the Challenger launch, the one that blew up in front of our eyes and traumatized us. I believe that was trauma-based mind control. And
why?
I was just watching a video last night. I had no idea the whole thing was faked. I mean, I had suspicions, but apparently they found every single crew member but one. I mean, I don't know how I missed that. Anyway, so let's get back to the Nazis, Project Paperclip, where they were using these Nazi scientists here in America. And we'll get to today. Go look into the Bush family history. You'll see that they were bankers. Actually, there was a Bush that was known as Hitler's angel. It was Hitler's banker, allegedly. And we have...
I hope you can see this. David Davis, Supreme Court Justice. You have to remember, Friedrich Drumpf, Donald Trump's grandfather, stole land. He was involved in all kinds of illegal, like lots of criminality, including prostitution and possibly human trafficking back then. They made him a justice of the peace because it was so corrupt out there, the Wild West, that the people running the show were just wicked, evil men. And that included the Bushes. Patriarch. Look at that patriarch. What happened? It used to be attractive. Not so much, right? Oh, pudgy. All right, let's stop being rude. Sorry, God. Let's get back to it real quick. To wrap it up.
Prescott Bush was heavily involved in government, was running things for quite some time. So that's the connection to the Nazis there through the Bush family. I mean, there are other connections as well, but we want to do this as quickly as possible. The Dulles family, we can go into.
The CIA recruits Howard Hughes for secret mission. At that point in his life, he was a very established businessman and entrepreneur. He invested his fortune in airlines, casinos, and aerospace engineering. Now, remember the casinos and their link to Lucky Luciano through or via Meyer Lansky, I believe it was. So, his company Surveyor 1, a robotic spacecraft, was the first American spacecraft to make a soft landing on the moon in 1966, per NASA, where it gathered information in preparation for the manned Apollo moon landings to come. Now, who is Apollo? The god of light, the angel that appears, right? The angel of light that fooled Muhammad and all the Muslims. That's Lucifer. That's wisdom. Lucifer's history is fascinating. We'll have to get into him soon. Hughes had shown that he could be of help to the U.S. government, and they would seek his help again in a covert mission. The U.S. Central Intelligence Agency would seek Hughes's assistance when they wanted to recover a Soviet submarine that was discovered near American territory. The sub sank in 1968, and the Soviets were, and then you can go on to read that article if you'd like. Tell me.
We can go into how the government started working with the media. Host of the Third International Congress of Eugenics. The purpose of the event was to call for the sterilization of 14 million Americans. So you can see how perhaps the United States government and some of its officials were involved in some of these Nazi-style experiments from the start. The Treasury, in 1945, Treasury Department revealed to Congress the United States produced the following percentages of war munitions for the Nazis. Paperclip agreed to finance the young man's first political race. This was the beginning of the... I mean, I don't know how I missed that. Anyway, as banker for... In fact, Prescott was Hitler's American banker. So you can see how perhaps the United States government and some of its officials were involved in some of these Nazi-style experiments from the start.
So far, everything that we've discussed regarding the Nazis, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Check this out.
They were 9-10 feet tall entities, and they told him that they were preparing for an intergalactic war with God, and that they were going to win. What happened was they opened up this portal, they created a rift, and entities began to come through. Not just this horror of Babylon being birthed, but other entities. The federal government at the highest levels have known that these are not space aliens, that these are entities coming from another dimension.
My name is Wes Fall, and I am part of Fall Brothers Productions and Fourth Watch Films with Justin Fall and with Chad Riley. And the Lord just directed our steps into kind of a full circle. We both went to film school, Justin and I did, years ago, and we had to pay bills, doing other things, but the Lord brought us back to making films. And so it's been a crazy ride, but I'm just glad to be here and doing what the Lord's called us to do.
My name is Justin Fall. And my background is in film production. I'm a film student from the Art Institute of Atlanta, and I'm also a career researcher. My main focus in life is to be able to wake up the church. I want to be able to better equip the church, and I want them to understand that the times they're going to be coming upon the face of this earth, which we are approaching, no one would deny that crazy prophecies are being fulfilled right now. Things that 100 years ago, the average Christian would not have understood the scripture the way that they would today, based on the unfolding of events that we're seeing. And so as a career researcher, my ministry is all about equipping the saints for the last days, equipping the tribulation saints, even if you want to use that language, but also to join the conversation of the world. I think that Christians need to be able to join the conversation about the paranormal, about the crazy topics. We need to join that conversation and give a biblical answer that will cause the world to want to draw near unto Christ.
We looked at this alien question. You can go back to even the past election in 2016. Hillary was talking about how if she won, she was going to open the vault and get into basically exposing what UFOs are and the alien question. We wanted to look at it in the biblical aspect of it and to try to break down, what are we dealing with here? Because the world does have this answer, but as we found out, so does the Bible.
Higher Entities, it's a film that deals with a very much political, paranormal conspiracy. We made Higher Entities for a lot of different reasons. The timing of Higher Entities could not have been better because we're dealing with a film that it digs deep into these areas of government alien entity connections. Now, why is that important? Because we're living in a time where we understand that the Antichrist is coming on the face of the earth. There will be an Antichrist. And we know that he has fallen angels that are going to be working with him. He's going to have a demonic army. He's going to have all types of lying signs and wonders. The Bible talks about these lying signs and wonders. And if it were possible, the elect would be deceived by his cunning. I believe the aliens in the last days, which we don't really believe them to be space aliens, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes, but I believe that the alien entities, the higher entities, they will likely use some type of a cataclysmic event something major, whether it's real or synthetic. We know about Project Bluebeam. Mm-hmm. We know about technology where they can project an image in the sky.
There's going to be things that come upon this earth that are going to cause men's hearts to fail them. And so, like right now, everybody is consumed with this Western civilization of idea of going to work and coming home and watching the ball game and getting married, 2.5 kids, dog and a cat, that whole deal. There's no room for supernaturalism there. But when that does take place, it's going to flip the world on its head. And so I think that this is kind of like we've already seen like a soft disclosure take place. And I think it's prepping the world for that. But even more so, I believe that it's tying into what the Bible says is going to take place. And ultimately, it's going to be pointing the world towards an antichrist, towards a false prophet promoting that antichrist. He's going to be able to call fire down from heaven. It's going to be some supernatural feats taking place in the eyes of men. And so if the world doesn't have a supernatural worldview, that's going to give it to them. I think that all this is going to culminate pointing people to this so-called messianic figure that's going to be in the place of Christ. And for the church, the big thing on that end of things is that if they don't have a supernatural worldview, if they see this coming upon the world, if just specifically in Matthew 24, people claiming to be anointed, people claiming to be Messiah, which is just another word for anointed, and underneath that, anointed for an office, they're going to be coming in the name of Jesus. So they get their foot inside the church doors, and they're saying they're anointed, and they're going to be doing crazy lying signs and wonders. And so that would be believing in what they see and what they experience versus having faith in God and His Word.
No, Jesus said that there's coming a time where they're going to say to Him, "Lord, Lord, I did all this good stuff in Your name." The thing that gets my attention there is that he mentioned some specifics like casting out demons in Your name. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a major denomination right now that they make their big deal on casting out demons. There's a couple of them, actually. There's going to be people that think they're operating in spiritual gifts, yet Jesus is going to say, "I never knew you."
Man. They went for it on 4th. Changed the whole game.
Rico, give me something smart to say.
Go with the parlay.
Yeah, totally. I've got some action on the game, too, on DraftKings.
Wait, really? I think I'm in love.
New customers bet $5, get $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. The crown is yours.
Wait time is approximately
Texas
40 minutes.
was feeling
We appreciate
unwelcome.
your patience. Your call is
Spiritual gifts, yet Jesus is going to say, "I never knew you." But what we're talking about with this alien idea, the aliens are going to be giving different types of experiences to people. This is what people have to understand. The experiences have to be tested with Scripture. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise we're going to accept them because they're supernatural experiences, whether it's a supernatural healing, whether it's some type of a prophetic event where they speak a word of knowledge or they know something about your history, whatever it may be. The aliens could have a cure for cancer. The aliens. These higher entities are coming from a different place than us. They're not earthborn. The only ones that could be earthborn would be the demons, which came through the line of the Nephilim. And obviously that's a little bit of a different scenario. It ties in together. But with higher entities we're dealing with, there is a group that we tracked in this film called the Collins Elite. And the idea was trying to answer the question, were there events in history where the American government was working with entities? That was kind of the beginning of this research. And if so, what happened? Can we validate this? What came of that? But also, were there factions in the government who stood up against these things? That was the premise of this film. And we started off by talking about a group known as the Collins Elite. Now, let's just go back in time. There was an event that took place back in the late 40s known as the Babylon Working Ritual. Now, this was a ritual that was carried out by Jack Parsons, JPL. People will even to this day say that JPL stands for Jack Parsons Laboratories, but on paper it's Jet Propulsion Laboratories. JPL is major. It's a historic, so much surrounding this, so much history here. Jack Parsons was not professionally trained, yet he was tapping into high technology and building rockets. How do you do that without any type of formal training? There were no rocket programs in America before Jack Parsons. This is paramount to understand. This guy was tapping into, theosophy, Thelema, the religion of Aleister Crowley. He was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, and he was working with L. Ron Hubbard, who was the founder of Scientology. Interestingly, not only did L. Ron Hubbard start Scientology, but he was a science fiction writer. The movie Battlefield Earth with John Travolta, well, that was written by L. Ron Hubbard. Interestingly also, John Travolta is a Scientologist, right? Now, I mention this because this is a man who writes science fiction, yet he started a religion based on science fiction. There has to be something in there where he's getting these clues. And
now remember, you can check out my other videos on Scientology where I speak about it briefly, but I discovered that he wasn't just into Thelema and, jet propulsion like Jack Parsons, because they were all buddies. Well, they have a sordid history. He was also obsessed with intelligence. L. Ron Hubbard was really into intelligence, just as much as the Thelema, and probably even more so than the Thelema. But, he was just a perv, too. Just a total degenerate, derelict, disgusting human being, in my opinion.
These ideas, he's getting these from another realm.
From that point, they ripped a hole open into space-time. And from that point afterwards, you had, regardless of what Parsons actually successfully completed during that with the Whore of Babylon and different things. After that, you had the Roswell incident, you had the Kenneth Arnold sightings, you had in '53 there was the swarm of UFOs that flew over the White House. And so there's this unleashing of supernatural activity that took place after that ritual was performed.
Babylon working was successful according to Jack Parsons. Matter of fact, Parsons said in his Antichrist Manifesto that they were successful and that a child was conceived in that act, and that there was a spirit known as Hilarion. The Whore of Babylon was what they were trying to bring about. They believed what we believe, in that America was the final Babylon. Like, this was the revived Babylon. They believed it, and they were occultists. We're Christians, and we believe it. There's evidence to back this up. But yes, let's backtrack just for a second. What happened was they opened up this portal, they created a rift, and entities began to come through. Not just this Whore of Babylon being birthed, but other entities, because people all over the place started having paranormal encounters, and they began to report this to law enforcement, report this to the FBI, report this to whatever agency they could get in touch with. And so the federal agencies said, we've got to come up with an answer for this. We were not prepared for any of this. There's UFO activity, there's talk of entities and demons and winged creatures and just all kinds of weird, just paranormal demonic activity following this ritual that Jack Parsons said finally worked. Wow. They did the ritual for a couple years. It finally worked, finally stuck. And that's what a scientist does. A scientist is going to work at something. He's going to work at the hypothesis until it's proven true or false. Now, finally, the researchers, the government puts together this group that says we're going to get answers to what exactly took place out there in the desert in California by Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. They go to Jack Parsons. And keep in mind, Jack Parsons is also working with the government. He's now been given, special privileges on things. So they go to him, they say, Jack, all of this stuff that's happening right now, did you do this? Did you do this? And he said, I think so. Now, shortly thereafter, Jack Parsons blows himself up in a lab. Accidental. It was not intentional. The occult belief was that whoever opened up the portal had to close the portal. Well, Jack Parsons is now dead. Wow. And the federal government is now having to understand and depict exactly to the public what's happening here. And so this group is researching, and out of that group, they finally start to make some headway. They know they're dealing with entities. And so in all of that, they begin to try to make contact with those entities, maybe for some help, maybe because they're trying to figure out how to close this thing, maybe they're trying to figure out how to undo what Jack Parsons did. So they go through satanic rituals to communicate, because that's the only method of communication that they know that works to contact these entities. In doing this, there's a small faction known as the Collins Elite. This is where our film picks up. The Collins elite was a small group inside of this larger group that was originally created to get answers to all of this. But once they began to engage in satanic rituals and magic and alchemy, this group says, hey, you know what? This is not what we signed up for. This small group raises up. It's a faction. It's a counterpoint group, which means that they're no longer in agreement with the big group. They have a different opinion. They say, we have a Christian worldview. This goes against our Christian worldview. And so they see that entities are being channeled and communicated with, and now technology is being given through these rituals to these other members of the government. So the Collins elite says, whoa, this is dangerous. You guys are really playing with fire here. We can't support this. We can't do this. And they came up with this idea that the aliens were going to take over, and that in order to protect our country from the aliens, from the entities, they believed that we needed to instate a forced theocracy based on the law of Moses. Because they thought if our country would go back under the law of Moses, that we would be untouchable from these entities. This group, this bigger group that was researching to get answers, they did not exist. Okay, this was what's known as a limited access program, or an LAP. A limited access program means that nobody in Congress has to know about this.
The Collins elite were a counterpoint group within different governmental organizations they were party to satanic ritual being used to make contact with these aliens or with these higher entities. And because of their Christian faith, they had the conviction. They saw this taking place, and they're like, well, we don't need to be a part of this. This is what the Bible talks about in the worship of demons and of other gods, and especially being, using blood sacrifice and different types of black magic to be able to accomplish it. So they saw that, and they didn't want to be a part of it. They also were able to tie this back to what Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard did in the desert in the late 40s.
You've got literally just the group, and maybe a director knows about it. Nobody else. It's completely classified. It's top secret. It's under lock and key. But I want to mention something. One of the bombshells that we dropped was that there's a declassified federal document. Anyone watching this interview can go find this document. It's on the FBI vault. Document 6751. It's a document from the 40s. It was written by a prominent member of academia, and it was submitted to the FBI. In this document, they make a case that entities are not space aliens, but that they're interdimensional or extra-dimensional entities that are crossing over from a plane known as the ethereal plane. Now, we know, as researchers of the New Age movement, we know that is where the ascended masters are supposedly said to be on a high level. This ethereal plane is very popular. When you talk to people who astral project, people who channel, people who remote view, people who want to tap in or go on a trip, an ayahuasca trip, a DMT trip.
Ayahuasca, different trips, DMT, that does allow you to cross over, or allows a person to cross over into those dimensions. Outside of that, the satanic ritual has proven to be the most effective, and from the research that we've done, the people that we've interviewed, that seems to be the constant. That's like it's a guarantee you're going to make contact if you do this.
Now, the federal government had this document in the 40s, and language was used in this document that came right out of the playbook of Theosophy. Now, the guy that received this document...
And Nazism.
This is so crazy. The federal agent receives a document, and look, the FBI is constantly bombarded with phone calls and letters and emails, and they just can't deal with all of the propaganda from citizens. People make stuff up, and it's just it's nothing. It's crying wolf. So the FBI has to really be careful what they accept and what they don't. But this was back in the 40s. So the guy that receives a document, he recognizes that this information was received through paranormal means. As a matter of fact, the language used in the 40s was super normal. That's the old way of saying paranormal, super normal. So he says that all of this information was received through super normal means, therefore we need to discount it. It's not valid information. Now that's the headline that he put. It's like a cover letter. If you really believe that, why did they classify the document? Why did they classify it and then forward it to all of these FBI prominent members at the highest level of security clearance? Why in the world would they classify it and lock it up if they didn't believe it? It wasn't until years later that they declassified document 6751. And I read this document and I'm thinking, okay, since the 40s, the federal government at the highest levels have known that these are not space aliens, that these are entities coming from another dimension.
In Scripture, you have the chariots that are mentioned, God's transport, basically, and it ripping through the space-time from the spiritual into the natural. I think that's basically the same thing that we're dealing with the UFOs. And because of the different deals that they've made with the governments, with the sharing of their technology, in order for them to have a safe space of being able to do whatever they do in the deep underground military bases, I think that some of the ones that you're seeing today are going to be basically the government taking that information and creating their own spacecraft. The technology that Stan Deyo was working on with anti-gravity craft, I think it follows along the same thing. You can go back to the Nazis with the Die Glocke and different things like that they made, which also they were highly involved with the occult. They didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to try this, this, and this. There was a basis. They went in there and they performed rituals to get the information to be able to practice that.
When you talk to someone who has worked in a deep underground military base, which we've interviewed people, they talk about different classes of entities. None of that is really mentioned in 6751. It's more so an overall summarization of what's going on. Now, there were some information about traveling through the dimensions. There's some very fascinating tidbits in this document. And we don't really go too deep into the document other than referencing it in the film, because we had to go through, we've got over 300 declassified documents in our collection right now, all pertaining to aliens, UFOs, extrasensory perception, psychic activity that they're training people to operate in. The federal government has been training people in the occult since the 40s, training them in how to operate in occult magic and occult sciences. Everything our Bible tells us is absolutely forbidden. Our federal government has been a part of this since the 40s. And I want to add, back in the 40s, they still promoted the idea of a Christian nation of America. Yet behind the scenes, it just goes to show that the people in charge of our government have been pacifying the society since the beginning. And I don't understand how people could be so blinded. We present the information. This is what they said in the 40s, and it's only gotten worse over the years. Now, let me just draw us into this other area real fast. This group, the Collins Elite, they really wanted to create, how can I put this? They wanted to create some type of resistance. Non-aggressive, of course. Non-aggressive resistance. That's what I understand that from my studies. That's what I believe. They wanted a non-aggressive resistance to what was taking place, because they saw that when a man or a group of men began to communicate with these entities, the hunger for power gets greater and greater and greater, and then you're no longer trying to get answers. You're now wanting to ask them to give you blessings. You're now getting technology and information from these entities, and you're utilizing it in the way that you structure your government moving forward. And you would say, well, why would these entities need the government? It's not a matter of them needing the government. It's a matter of setting up the scene for the end times deception, where the Antichrist is going to unite the governments of the world. It's all part of their long game. They've been working on this since the beginning of time. It didn't work at the Tower of Babel. The Lord ended it quickly, but here we are today. Where are we today, and what happened between then and now? Well, what we find out is that one of our contacts, Stan Deyo, who, by the way, Tom Horn gave us a great endorsement of Stan Deyo. Tom Horn, before his house burned down years ago, he had this big newspaper article from the UK, and standing on the cover with these other elite doctors and scientists, it's Stan Deyo. And they're giving him credit in the UK, public knowledge, that he's working on anti-gravity craft.
I felt after the trauma that nobody was going to listen to me. It felt like the color had been drained out of my world. I just didn't have any purpose anymore. I just wanted to get away from the military. People say that. There's a better way. You start talking about natural medicine, plant medicine. It's time for help. That's why I'm here. I'm finally getting help.
I wasn't scared of reliving my trauma. I was scared of...
Now, the film that we did called The Hollow Earth Chronicles, we did a whole segment in that film on Operation High Jump. This was a joint task force between the American government, the British government, and the Australian government, headed by the U.S. and Admiral Byrd. They go down to Antarctica in what turns into a UFO battle. And their big plan got cut in half, and they had to come home early because we lost men, we lost ships. There's stories of UFOs coming up out of the water and just cutting ships in half with laser. I mean, just crazy stuff that you only see in movies. What's fascinating about this is that this was a joint task force with those same three governments that are now working together with Standeo, the British, the American, and the Australians, working together on alien technology yet again, years after Operation High Jump happened. Standeo was working as a secret agent for the FBI in Australia inside of the deep underground military bases. And he said while he was in the program, he knew about the deal with Eisenhower. He knew in the program that President Eisenhower had made a deal with what they called alien entities. I believe that the evidence points to two events taking place, and these two events happened 1 year apart. The first one happened at Edwards Air Force Base, where Eisenhower disappears, and they call it a media blackout. It was kind of similar to when Hillary Clinton and President Obama disappeared and were at the Bilderberg meeting, but nobody knew where they were, and it was called a media blackout. People freaked out, right? Well, something similar happened here, where Eisenhower is no longer on radar, and they come back later and say, oh, well, he had a dental emergency, and so he had to go seek a private dental care. Now, that happened, and then a year later, we have the Holloman Air Force Base event. Now, the thing about the Holloman event was that people were there who witnessed it. Holloman is where they were out on the landing strip, and you had UFOs landing, meeting with him. Meeting took place with Eisenhower and others, and then those UFOs took off. Now, there were eyewitnesses who have come forward. I was just talking about this with Chad Riley because he found some videotapes from the 90s. This is before the internet was doing its thing. In the 90s, there were videos that were recorded, old VHS tapes of some of these disclosure type engagements. I don't know what you want to call it, but these are men that were there. They're decorated men from the government, and they're now speaking out that yes, UFOs were landing and taking off at Holloman Air Force Base, and I believe it was 1955. We do know that things began to be more apparent after Babylon working, and therefore there were more things taking place where there was people seeking the entity. So what I believe happened was that the rift was open, the tear in the space-time continuum, if you will, a portal, Stargate was opened, and the government got involved, the feds got involved. Once they began to communicate with the entities, there was now a relationship being built, and it was no longer shock value that there are these entities who want to work with us. So I think that was definitely an open door, no pun intended, for those entities to now be communicating with President Eisenhower years later, not too many years later, but a few years later. They're now meeting with Eisenhower, and so the story goes like this. We're on the road trip. We're driving out to meet with Ray Boucher, who was contacted by the Department of Defense. This is really important. This is one of those like haymakers. The information that he gives us that he presented his full disclosure in our film Higher Entities. But we're driving there and we're having a discussion, and we decided let's just go ahead and let's run some cameras, while we're driving and talking. So we set up our production stuff in Darren's SUV. We're driving down the road, and we had this conversation about this Eisenhower deal. See, what I had heard and researched was a little different than what Darren had picked up in his research. And this is one of those scenes in the movie where it's just like, wow, like the stuff that came out was so organic and unbelievable. Apparently, there were two events that happened, and a lot of people blur them. A lot of people will mix it up with the Edwards Air Force Base and the Holloman. They're two separate events a year apart. That's so important. But the idea is that the gray aliens on record met with Eisenhower, and then you had this other group of entities known as like the Tall Whites or the Nordics. They met with Eisenhower separately, and they warned him. They said, you do not ever want to make a deal with the gray aliens. They are deceptive. They are very deceptive. All they want to do is deceive you and enslave you. They're demonic, basically. I don't think they use the word demonic, right? Because they're all demonic. But they were warning Eisenhower never to enter into a covenant with the Greys. Well, they were the good guys, the Greys were the bad guys. This is fascinating because if you fast forward into this idea of a coming deception, they had to already set the groundwork to create a good alien, bad alien, good cop, bad cop. Because what we're dealing with here is a bunch of liars. You know, Satan's a liar, his demons are liars. That's why when someone starts playing with a Ouija board, their grandmother starts talking to them. Well, it's not your grandmother, bro. Yeah. That's a demon. Yeah. That's an entity who wants to deceive you. Sure. They want to steal, to kill, and to destroy. That's biblical. And we're also told as Christians, we got to be vigilant and we got to be sober-minded because Satan is our adversary. And the word Satan, the name Satan isn't really a name. We have this misconception that Satan, the devil, the red pitchfork. And in reality, Ha-Satan is the enemy, the adversary. And so when we say Satan, it could actually be referring to the whole team of demons and entities, fallen angels. And so what we have is we have the fallen angels. And now it's my personal belief. Let me just lay this out real quick. It's my personal belief based on the book of Revelation and based on me using a calculator and understanding some definitions. I was able to calculate that if a third of the angels fell with Lucifer, with Satan, the Satan, right? If a third of them fell with him, and that's also based on another passage of a third of the stars getting knocked down to earth. If that passage means what we think it means, and if we understand it correctly, a third of the angels fell with Satan. And you can do your math and figure out that equals somewhere between 30 to 50 plus million fallen angels on the surface of the earth. Now, out of that, some of them were put in chains. The Bible tells us this because the ones that committed sexual sin, the Genesis 6, they have been locked up in chains. We can read about this in Jude. But the ones that are not locked in chains, just think about it, 30 to 50 plus million fallen angels on the face of the earth. Like that's, I made the comment recently in an interview I did that is more than the population of the largest state in America.
I mean, these are the gods of the nations. These are the ones who have been worshipped throughout time. These are the ones of the nations who they set up the groves and the high places and offered sacrifices to them. They've been presenting themselves to humanity throughout time under different names, but under the same descriptions of their characteristics. So when you look at it in those kind of terms, and to also answer your question about are they otherworldly or interdimensional, through the document 6751, we did find that back in the 40s even, they were saying that they were interdimensional beings. Wow. So that will parallel with what Scripture has to say of fallen angels. With Job, for instance, you have Job, and this kind of is a crossover between our first film, Hollow Earth Chronicles, and the latest Higher Entities. But in Job, you have, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. So on one hand, you have him being able to present himself before the Lord, but he also is able to, and that's the spiritual realm. That's the things that we can't access. There's a barrier that's been put in place. But Satan and these divine beings, with the divine council, they were able to hold an audience before the Lord. At the same time, Satan says here that he's allowed, or that he's been going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. So that's an interdimensional feat.
And by the way, Tom Horn, his brother-in-law was murdered. He worked at Los Alamos. This was the first time he ever told the story publicly. He never spoke this story publicly. Matter of fact, he told his sister that he would not disclose the full story while she was still alive. Yet here he is. He worked it out to tell us the story in our film. His brother-in-law worked for Los Alamos. And interestingly, he married Tom's sister, who had alien encounters from the time she was about 13 years old. Not only did she suffer alien visitations and paralysis as a child, her daughter, the next generation, when she entered into that age of puberty, she began to get attacked. And then her husband, this is where it gets crazy. He comes home one day. They start drinking, knocking back a few. One thing leads to another, which I found out a lot of times when people start drinking, they're able to pull things out of the recesses that they would never talk about. So many stories of alien abductions and demonic activity people are willing to talk about after they have a few drinks. Things that are in those deep recesses come out. Now, I'm not saying that to recommend or I'm just saying that a lot of the stories we find out about in our research comes from one guy having a few drinks, and then it just starts coming out. Wow. It's like the filter's gone. Long story short, and we give the full story in Higher Entities. It's a great story. Not great as in good, but it's very fascinating. He comes home, he and the wife start drinking, and she decides she's going to share some of her childhood history with him that he didn't know about. And if I remember correctly how it all went down, he comes out and says, well, this is crazy because we're actually working with this type of stuff at Los Alamos. Now, he gives her information that we don't know, but he disclosed to her what he was doing in the alien base that the conspiracy theorists call an alien base. But now it doesn't really seem like a conspiracy theory anymore, because if it was just a theory, why would he have been killed 24 hours later? 24 hours after he shares what they were doing at Los Alamos, he disappears, no body found, nothing. They say that they've never seen him back in the offices, So she reaches out and she's like, where's my husband never came home from work. He left for work. He left our house. He drove, he went to Los Alamos, but he never came home. Well, she now wants to get her benefits just to help pay for all the expenses that he was bringing in money. He's no longer there, and he's been working hard. There's pension and guarantees that she's supposed to get. They won't give her anything because there's no body. Without a body, there's no death certificate. Without a death certificate, there's no benefits. So she, working for the federal government as well, she starts rattling the cage high up, and finally, once she starts dropping information that's putting fear in people, they, in order to shut her up, finally say, okay, you know what, here you go, here's your benefits, done. Now, that tells me that it's not a conspiracy theory. There's actual fact to this. There's alien activity, demonic activity going on at Los Alamos, and it was so serious that they would have had his house bugged, and that they were tracking every discussion he had in that house. And that was the thing, was he was working in the DUM, the Deep Underground Military Base. From my understanding, he was working there, and he told her what he was working on. Wow. We don't even know what that was. That's what's so fascinating about this story, is that we don't even know what he disclosed, but it was something so serious that 24 hours later, he's dead. Again, we're dealing with the fallout of what took place at the Babylon Working. Babylon Working changed everything. I believe that was prophetic on the satanic timeline. That was a big deal. And so I do believe for a fact that Roswell was just another byproduct. And I also believe, based on another FBI document that we have in our stack of over 300, is that there were more than one craft. And I believe, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I want to say there was possibly 9 bodies, according to one declassified document. This is going to lead us right into Ray Boucher. Ray Boucher is now bringing all of this current. We're no longer dealing with 1940s or 50s or 60s. We're dealing with our lifetime, and this is where it just hits home. Ray Boucher is an ordained minister. He has been a Baptist minister, a Lutheran minister, and he's also known as a Lutheran exorcist. We're very particular about who we work with and who we yoke up with in ministry. And after talking with Ray and looking into him, he is extremely biblically sound. His theology is right in line with Scripture on all the majors that would matter. And so we did some homework on this guy. Tom Horn, Derek Gilbert, everybody that we talked to, people that I'm not even going to name, people that we talked to off the record, everybody kept saying, including Darren Geisinger and Chad Riley, they all said, you got to talk to Ray Boucher. They said he was met with by 2 members of the Department of Defense because of his unique background as a minister, as an exorcist, and as the head of MUFON for his state, which is Nebraska. This is a guy who was heavily involved in the UFO community back before the internet was a thing. He would go to these meetings, he would read up. Back then it was like a videotape. It was like $60, like a documentary videotape. You pay $60. These were the days before the internet, before YouTube. Information was harder to get. But Ray Boucher was heavily involved in the UFO community back in the day. And so being the head of MUFON, and also for his state, and also for being a minister and an exorcist and a UFO advocate, a UFO truth advocate, these 2 men contact him from the DOD, and they say, we really need to meet with you because of your unique standing. We need to meet with you, and we need we need you to consult with us about what some of this may be. So he met secretly with these members of the Department of Defense, and they told him that they were part of a non-existent group inside the DOD working on government facilities paid for by taxpayer dollars, and that they began to try to get answers to some of this stuff, and they began to engage in occult rituals to communicate with these entities. Now let me explain this. If you don't feel like this is just a reoccurrence of the Collins elite, I mean, this is recent. This is happening in the modern time period. He says that their bigger group was engaging in what he called satanic rituals, and he even said that the DOD contacts hinted at human sacrifice being done on the taxpayer dollar behind closed doors on government facilities. He said they started off with, we just want to get answers. And he says, and that turned into a we can do better mentality. We can do more than this. We can go above and beyond. This is the same story you see when you're watching movies about famous drug dealers. Oh, we can do better mentality. Starts off, they're just selling a little dope.
Dude, this is Lucifer's mentality. He wanted to know more. More and more, and it was never enough. It's destructive.
Before you know it, they're a kingpin, and they just want more and more and more. It's not that they need it anymore, but it's that we can do better mentality. We can't leave well enough alone. To quote Karate Kid, we cannot leave well enough alone, and we can do better, and we're going to do better, and we're going to get more technology, we're going to get more information, we're going to get more power, and we're going to rise up by the power of the entities. And so Ray Boucher explained to them that yes, this stuff was extremely demonic. That yes, y'all had a good idea. Basically, your instincts were correct. This is demonic and you don't need to be doing it. They knew that was the case, but they needed someone they could talk to, such as Ray Boucher with his unique background. And so he was able to meet with them, and I believe they met twice. They had some phone conversations. But the thing is Ray wouldn't meet with us originally. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He's a very friendly guy. He was willing to just be cordial and hello, nice to meet you. But when we told him we wanted him on camera and that we wanted to meet with him, it was like, well, I could probably work with you guys at some point. He says, but I'm really busy. It's kind of like the nice way of saying, sorry, can't help you. We continued to try to reach out to him. We began our investigation. We talked with Tom Horn and Derek Gilbert and these others. Derek Gilbert told us to go listen to an interview he did with a podcast. Dr. Future, I think, was the name of the show. And we listened to it. And at the very beginning of the podcast, the guy says, wow, we've been trying to schedule this with you for over a year, and you're finally coming on to talk with us. So I imagine Ray Boucher is extremely careful. He's very standoffish. He wants to protect his family. He doesn't want to get involved in something he shouldn't be. And so I just kind of wrote it off that he's not going to meet with us. And we're probably going to have to just go ahead and end this project early. He finally comes through and says, okay, I'll do it. But I'm not going to tell you where we're going to meet or what time we're going to meet. He says, plan on coming down.
So I have to stop it somewhere. If you want to go check out the rest or the full video, Declassified Documents Reveal Fallen Angels at End Times Productions. Thanks for listening. You have a fantastic day. And I hope this ties up some loose ends that you had. Let me know in the comments. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.